and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. One of the things I want to kind of dive into, even though it's kind of old news, I haven't dived into this yet, but it has to deal with the EPA and their dumping into the river, their pollution. Also going to kind of cover the Iran deal a little bit. Don't want to go too deep into that one as of now. But I wanted to cover one here. And this has to do with Ferguson. And Josh Cook interviewed Stuart Rhodes, which many of you know is the president of Oath Keepers, one of the founders. And, you know, there's a lot of BS going around about the Oath Keepers out there, try and discredit them, try to turn them into an enemy of the protesters, even though a lot of the protesters are now seeing that, well, you know, they're not as bad as we thought. It's one of those divide and conquer that's not working. And the establishment, the power structure, which a lot of people that are, even if they're not, you know, at the top, some people like, oh, the police chief, even though they're not really part of the elitist system, they're trained, and so they have that kind of egotistical power grab type thing, trying to find out if they're doing anything wrong. Well, I'm going to play this interview. You can find it on Ben Swan on YouTube. You can also find it at truthmedia.com. I just happen to have it up here on YouTube already. So I want to play this to kind of let you hear from Stuart Rhodes' mouth about the update of the Oath Keepers' presence there in Ferguson, Missouri. So let me cue that up here. Here we go.
You are listening to Joshua Cook of truthmedia.com. Guys, thank you so much for tuning back in to truthinmedia.com. I'm Josh Cook. I'm really excited because we have Stuart Rhodes, president of Oath Keepers of America. You guys have been already reading the article that's posted on truthinmedia.com. I mean, it's gone viral. It's close to, just within 24 hours, it's almost 20,000 shares on Facebook. Stuart, thanks so much for your time. And I just wanted to ask you a couple questions. I know you weren't there in Ferguson, but I know your team's out there. And my first question is about the media. You know, the media's been saying a lot of things about you guys. So the media's getting a lot of things wrong about your group and why you're there. So where exactly is the media getting things wrong?
Well, one of the first things is I said that our presence was inflammatory, and it's quite the opposite. There was actually no shots fired, and interesting enough, no arrests made during the time that our guys were on the streets. And we protected several black-owned businesses again, like we did last year.
Right.
So the point of us being there is A, lead by example and show the people of Ferguson this is how you prevent arson, this is how you prevent looting, and et cetera, and protect your community so that you don't have this false choice that's being presented to the American people that the only way to stop arsonists and looters is to trample on the First Amendment rights of the protesters or to have a hyper-militarized police state. The American people are being given a false choice. What we really want to see is the people of Ferguson, and we did see this, more business owners in Ferguson in this latest incident were standing outside their businesses and guarding them with shotguns and rifles. I believe Sam Andrews said at least 6 black-owned businesses were doing that. Last year, it was only 2. So there's a growing number of businesses that are doing exactly what we did, is stand up and do what the police can't do. The police cannot or will not protect the people's actual businesses from the looters and arsonists. And so the best answer is for the folks of Ferguson to do it themselves. It takes away that false choice.
Yeah, I remember because I talked to you last year when you were in Ferguson. The bottom line is, some of the police, they were just not able to get everywhere. They weren't able to. They were only protecting some buildings. But you guys were not.
There's never enough cops.
Yeah, you guys were not only protecting businesses, but you're talking about apartment complexes. I mean, people were living in these buildings, and you guys were protecting from the arsonists. Let me ask you this, Chief John Belmer. He said, basically he's quoted as saying that your presence was both unnecessary and inflammatory. How would you like to respond to that?
Well, as I already did in the inflammatory part, actually, I think we had a calming effect. And most of the protesters were there last year, realized that we were there to stand up for their rights, too, and to show the right way. I think Chief Belmore, like all too many police officers, has this idea that only the police, that they're the only ones who should have firearms and be armed. And it's a threat to their turf, and it's a turf battle. He's kind of a small-minded man and looks at it like that. What we're doing is leading by example. We want to see the people of Ferguson stand up for themselves and take care of their own security so they don't need a heavy police presence, and that's the answer. And Chief Belmer needs to respect that. The people of Missouri passed a constitutional amendment to recognize the right of the people to open carry, and the chief needs to respect it under his oath.
Yeah, I don't think the media really understood that. I mean, according to the law, Missouri law, I mean, you have a right to open carry.
Right. And he doesn't like that, apparently, but tough. The people have spoken, and furthermore, it's now a constitutional issue. They need to respect the Constitution he's sworn else to defend. So, frankly, they need a chief of police there. I think a lot of the problems go away with better leadership. But bottom line is the people themselves need to step up and take care of their own neighborhoods and suppress the thugs. The few thugs who are causing problems, it's up to the experienced veterans in Ferguson to step up and do like the blacks did during the 1960s with the deacons for, they're called the Deacons for Justice. They're black veterans from World War II who stepped up and guarded the homes of the civil rights protesters.
So I heard also a lot of reports that you were protecting journalists. I remember last time I actually saw a video of a journalist being attacked. But there seems like there was no criticism of, people like high-profile journalists like Anderson Cooper, and there's no criticism of his security team. But for some reason, because some of your guys wanted to protect local journalists, it seems like they were criticizing you for doing that. I mean, I'm kind of baffled that they would do that. Any thoughts on that?
Right. Well, yeah. Exactly. If you're a mainstream media journalist and have a professional security team, that's okay. But if you're alternate media like Alex Jones or some other small group who has us along to help protect them, then that's somehow extreme. So it's a double standard. It is. Like the politicians have armed bodyguards, armed to the teeth all the way around them while they tell the average Joe, you can't have weapons.
So what type of responses are you getting from around the country? I know that a lot of the protesters, a lot of business owners appreciate you being there, despite what Chief John Wilmer says. All I know is there's a lot of support for you guys just from the articles that we wrote, just on Twitter, just on the social media. What are some of the responses you guys are getting?
Just thumbs up, and it's also the same response we got when we were protecting the recruiters. We're still doing that in many places against the threat of violence when they're not allowed to protect themselves. It's the same problem. People are being told that you cannot protect yourself, can't take care of yourself. Instead, you must rely only on the police. And of course, there's never enough police to protect you. And then they say, well, the answer then is more suppression of your rights. So it's that false choice. And whether it's an ISIS threat against active duty military, whether it's a terrorist threat against recruiters, whether it's arsonists and looters at Ferguson, it's the same answer. The people should step up and provide their own security. And that's our mantra, and we will offer free assistance and training in helping them do that.
Are you finding a lot of veterans that really believe in the Constitution? They want to protect their country, the Constitution, their rights. Are you guys seeing a more of an influx of people wanting to join the Oath Keepers?
Yes, we are. And the more active we are in doing things like this, or like Sugar Pine Mine, or the stand-up right now in Montana at the White Oak Mine in Montana, Lincoln, Montana, we're seeing more and more very serious people show up that are willing to pitch in. And that's what we need to see. But the big message for us, from us, is that we want to see them get their own community squared away so they can take care of themselves. People in Ferguson should have it handled. It should not take outsiders coming in to do what they should be doing for themselves. So our real goal is to lead by example, then be a training cadre to help them train up.
You know, you guys did a really good job helping the Bundy Ranch. It was just an incredible example of just Americans standing up against the federal government when they don't obey the Constitution and property rights. Any updates on that? Is there any feedback from the Bundys about?
Well, I know they want a lawsuit over the abuse of their cattle. I don't know all the details, but I know that was recognized in the courts as a gross abuse of power. And I think it was a watershed moment. There were a lot of lessons learned out of that. We've gotten better. Each operation has gotten tighter and better run, and so we keep getting better as we go. But like I said, the big mission for us though is the training American people. So we really want folks to look around their own neighborhood, to a neighborhood watch, get with their pastor, get their church active and preparing, and just get their communities ready, which is why we're sponsoring statewide conferences across the country in every state on religious preparedness.
So if somebody's listening to us now, they want to get involved, maybe even started their own chapter or maybe find people with like-minded values, how do they get involved?
Just go to oathkeepers.org and the contact form they can use there to email us. Let us know what state you're in, and we'll try to hook you up with either an existing chapter or help you start one, like you said. And a big part of what we're doing now is our CPT program, which stands for Community Preparedness Teams, which is exactly what we did in Ferguson, Sugar Pine Mine. All of those are examples of what we want to see folks doing for themselves.
Well, I tell you what, I was just talking to Sam Andrews, and I tell you what, man, he has just a passion in his voice, and the fact that he's willing to go in Ferguson and help Americans and really demonstrate, hey, you have rights, they need to be protected, and I just really respect your group, despite what the media and all the criticism is. I mean, we kind of expect that, but I just appreciate that what you guys are doing, just educating people at the same time, not only protecting people, but also educating Americans about their constitutional rights. So, so Stuart Rose, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate coming on for truthinmedia.com.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Take care.
That was Stuart Rhodes, truthinmedia.com, Ben Swan on YouTube. Now, we see a attack too when we've seen the Trayvon Martin, and you know they use that in the media to start going after, should people do community watches? Isn't that a bad idea? That's what we have cops for. And you started seeing that come out, but it's a really important thing. And then you see that it makes it extremely hard for the cops to be used in this abusive manner. We've seen that here at Ferguson when Oath Keepers show up. Not only the cops, but even the provocateurs that are trying to set businesses on fire. Um, we've seen the Oath Keepers come out and help with that. The Bundy Ranch, the mine. It shows that when there is a substantial amount of the community that's willing to risk themselves and theirs, not to gain something from the government, not to ask for something from the government, like you see in a lot of these led protests by these socialist groups and even the fascist groups too. Not those protests, because those tend not to do nothing but anger people. And then they just push agenda along using those as tools. But when you really see the successful ones is the ones where people stand up and say, stay out of their business. And you've even seen it outside of Oath Keepers. And the latest one where the veteran got the notice from the VA saying that he's not allowed to purchase firearms or own firearms, and the community showed up, and the sheriff even came out and spoke out against it and said he would prevent them from doing that. He would stand in between. You see success, and we need to do that, and that needs to go across every race, every culture. As long as you're not harming other people, the government needs to stay out of your business. And when we see that success, we see government go, whoa, I don't know what to do now. Because a lot of society has been pushed and propagandized and brainwashed against doing that. The only time they're out there protesting, a lot of times with these big groups like Occupy and all this, they're asking for something. What we need to see more of is people going, I don't want anything. Stop taking my stuff. Stop getting in my business. Leave me the hell alone. Let me live my life and prosper and live in happiness and free. I'm not out there to harm people. Go about your business. Because if we have that, then it makes it impossible for government to trample on people's rights. When you see the community and law enforcement stand up against it, makes it hard for them to trample on your rights and steal your property. On a massive scale, what this could potentially do is mind-blowing. Will we ever get there? I think eventually we would need to evolve, unless they genetically evolve us into something that becomes more pet or slave-like. When you're just, the cattle dog or the cattle. So, you can choose what direction you want to go. Okay, I'm going to get into a Ron Paul Liberty Report, and this is something I've been wanting to kind of go over a little bit here. And it's the EPA protecting the environment. Ron Paul Liberty Report, and we'll get into this right after this clip here.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Dr. Paul. Yeah.
Well, we're going to clean up a mess. The EPA is supposed to protect us. Looks like they haven't been doing a very good job, and they've been in the news lately. But they assure us that they will have an investigation and check up on this and act responsibly and assume the responsibility. I think the odds are pretty slim that they will assume the responsibility like if it would have happened with a private company and they weren't responsible. But they said they're responsible. But, you know, in a way, they're responsible by paying for this, demanding more money, taking more money from us, the taxpayers, and probably writing more regulations. So I'm not all that optimistic. I was never a fan of the EPA, but I'm not feeling sorry for them right now.
Yeah, this is an absolute disaster. I'm sure everyone has seen the pictures of this horrific orange.
Right.
Looks like they dumped orange juice in the river. Unfortunately, it's not as tasty as orange juice. The Gold King mine in southern Colorado, just a couple of numbers that I got from a CNN article, 3 million gallons of heavy metal-filled wastewater made it into the river. 12,000 times, the lead content is 12,000 times higher than normal. 3 states affected. 45,000 people, they get their water from this river, generally speaking, and they'll be running out of water soon. But, as you pointed out, the EPA said things are on the mend now. The ratings are normal, so would you have a drink out of that, Rivers?
Well, the principle is so bad that they're going to protect us. But more back to the details, there was one individual that commented on this before it happened. And evidently he has a few credentials on knowing something about this, and he said, watch out, there's a problem out there. Could you tell us about that?
That was interesting. It was a story that Zero Hedge ran, which I know we both enjoy reading quite a bit. This is a retired geologist who was familiar with the EPA's operations trying to clean up these mines, and he warned a couple of weeks ago that the EPA is going to have a massive spill on this river, and they're going to use it as an excuse to demand a new wastewater treatment facility there under the Superfund. It sounds pretty crazy, but what he said is exactly what happened.
Well, I know. He predicted it. I don't know. And in the way this country goes, maybe they will respond to rewarding a company, an agency that really fouls up and give them more money and thinking that they can correct it. I don't know what year the Superfund came into being, but I remember voting on it, and there weren't too many people, I imagine, that voted against it. I voted against it on the principle that damage to property is not a collective problem. So it's always the taxpayers that has to get bailed out, and it should be always the property owner. You get into more difficulty with bankruptcies and things like that. But this idea that we have to have an agency to protect us. I just don't like the idea of government protecting us from ourselves or protecting our property. We end up with FEMA and flood insurance and all these other things that go haywire. But it's been there. Nixon started in 1970, and it's to protect us. But, you know, I was raised in a city that was probably one of the most polluted cities ever in the country, and that was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In industrialization, World War II, and this sort of thing. And a lot of steel, a lot of productivity, but we couldn't see the sun until noontime sometimes. The rivers were sewers. And guess what? It got cleaned up. But it was cleaned up on the principle that there's some local responsibility, and it was done with local regulation. So it's not like if we didn't have the EPA, there would be no hope for it. But I think the basic libertarian principle is nobody has a right to pollute. Sometimes I see the EPA manipulating, believe it or not, the regulations to benefit some people, where you can buy permits and you can pollute a little here if you don't pollute over here. So big companies are able to manage things better. The hypocrisy in this whole thing, when you look at the Al Gores of the world who pretend they're going to clean up the air and the CO2, and they're the biggest polluters ever. So I'm not very happy with this process, and I'll be less happy if it's used to expand EPA rather than calling it to task and cutting back and looking at this from a property rights issue.
And don't forget the revolving door between the regulators at EPA and the corporate, the nice corporate jobs.
That's fine. That's right, and that happens everywhere, whether it's in the banking industry or the drug industry and the FDA. It's back and forth. It's corporatism at its worst, and it is involved here. So to me, it's a real shame that people succumb because they see the problem, and somebody comes and they'll say they'll take care of it. But the biggest argument that we have that they put on against us is the fact that it wouldn't work. But if companies can get permission from the government, and that was more or less what happened in the Industrial Revolution in Pittsburgh, is the courts wouldn't close them down. The air was polluted, the water was polluted, and they weren't called to task. So instead of saying, look, you don't have a right to do it, I think the environment would be better with private owners recognizing you can't pollute your neighbor's air, you can't pollute your neighbor's water, and you aren't allowed to because you're violating a property right. And that's what is lost. Now it turns over, well, if the government's responsible for protecting the property, maybe they own the property. And of course, we found out in looking at this that if you don't go along with the EPA, you might end up in jail.
And I know what you've talked about a lot as a former legislator is that the EPA takes the existing law and then they radically expand it through almost like pseudo laws called regulations.
Right, and they will do things that they weren't explicitly given authority to do, so they expand the scope that they can do. But first, the regulations shouldn't have been written, and allowing them, the law shouldn't have been written. Then they shouldn't be allowed to write these regulations because they are laws. But then when they do these things, does Congress ever react? I think in the whole time I was there, I think there was one outrageous issue that was rescinded, because Congress has the right to rescind the regulation, but they essentially never do it. They just are apathetic about it, and they just let it go because they might. She says that she's very sorry, and they are studying it very carefully, and they're going to correct this. Of course, it's not the way they would treat a private owner. I mean, they'd be probably hauled off in handcuffs by now. But I think it's a story to show that people should never be dependent on government per se to take care of us and protect us. It's better to do it locally than nationally. I think a comparison to this would be FEMA, how FEMA protects us from flooding. And all they do is take over property rights, and the owners can't take care of their own property. And of course, in that case, it's the insurance that encourages people to do dumb things. And in this, in a way, it gives some companies cover. Well, the EPA's in there, and they're taking care of, and they have the regulations, and they get away with things. So I've always seen the FEMA, once again, as an attack on the principle of private property. And I believe that economic liberty is protected by private property, but I also think civil liberties are protected by property. Our right to come to this studio and talk about it, it's this right to be secure in this building that allows us to do this. So property is so important in the protection of liberty, whether it's civil liberties or whether it is economic liberty. And of course, I would like to see it applied to internationally as well, that we don't have the right to interfere with property management outside our own realm, especially since we don't do a very good job here. Yeah. And in my lifetime, the principle of private property has been severely undermined.
I think there is this misconception that under a libertarian society, if there ever was one, it would be everyone could pollute willy-nilly, the place would turn into an uninhabitable planet, and it's such a misconception. I think you've addressed that here with the issue of property rights.
Well, and others will say, Ron, that's too bad. You're going to close them down. But what are you going to do with those 15,000 employees? They're going to be unemployed. Oh, wouldn't that be sad? Maybe they should go and work for McDonald's or somebody else. I mean, do productive work instead of this thing. And I imagine in that 15,000, I bet a lot of them are making good money. I bet there's a lot of them that are way above the average wage. That's generally the case in fancy retirement funds. So if they could claim that they have done a perfect job, it'd be a different story. But that's not going to happen. The bureaucracy always fails, and they will always downplay the fact that there could be a private market solution to these problems. And in this case, I argue that it could probably be a lot better rather than permitting corporations to get away with it, which they were able to do, in the early history in the Industrial Revolution, because there was no control at all. And then they had to say, well, government is the solution. Well, the government is the solution if the government is there to protect private property and get out of the way of interfering with our rights and interfering with our right to own property. We shouldn't have an agency of government which is arbitrary, which licenses, and then without due process of law, taking property from people and actually putting people in prison because they covered over a pothole or something, improve their land, improve the environment, and they can be found guilty of some vicious federal crime, and the EPA agents come. They are the police. They come with guns. It's part of the militarization of the local police, which has been sort of indoctrinated by federal standards. We have too many police, and they say we need them because we have to enforce the law. Right. That means we have too many laws. And the sooner we realize that, whether they're drug laws or environmental laws, we can solve these problems in a much different fashion. That's what liberty is all about. I hope you all join the cause of liberty and promote it, because that will be the answer to what we face today in this country with the continued challenge to our personal liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report. Find it on YouTube, Ron Paul Liberty Report. And people are like, well, the EPA needs to pay for that. That was the EPA's fault. They need to pay for that. Who is the EPA? It's a government bureaucracy. Where do they get their money? Government. Where does government get their money? From you. But let's say you wanted them to be on a record as a fine that they made the mistake, that it was their fault. Here from WashingtonTimes.com. EPA won't face fines for polluting rivers with orange muck. It says here, Denver, unlike BP, which was fined $5.5 billion for the 2010 Deepwater Horizon disaster, EPA will pay nothing in fines for unleashing the Animas River spill. Sovereign immunity. The government doesn't fine itself, said Thomas L. Sansonetti, former Assistant Attorney General for the Justice Department's Division of Environment and Natural Resources. However, the EPA does... Give me a second here. It says, however, quote, the EPA does not fine itself the way that you would fine an outside company like BP, said Mr. Sansonetti, who served from 2001 to 2005 under President George W. Bush. What the EPA can be expected to cover is the cost of the cleanup and compensation for the damage caused, funding that would have to be appropriated by Congress, meaning that taxpayers will foot the bill. Quote, that's going to have to be appropriated because that sort of thing is not included in the EPA's budget. Now a Denver attorney, Mr. Sansonetti. As for compensation, he said it is simple to the BP situation because you've got rafting companies that couldn't raft. You've got kayakers that couldn't kayak. You've got ranchers that didn't want spoiled water being drunk by their cows. So far, there hasn't been no estimates as to the cost of the disaster. The orange plume borne by the Animas River has since spread to New Mexico via the San Juan River and is now headed to Utah. And that's out of the Washington Times. Now, I had another one here. This one is out of Denver, CBS local. Governor Hickenlooper takes statement making gulp from Animas River. Durango, Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper. Give me a second here. Says Governor John Hickenlooper, who famously, what is going on here? Sorry. Said he drank fracking fluid to make a point about its safety. He drank from the recently contaminated Animas River on Wednesday. 3 million gallons of waste from the Gold King mine poured into the Animas River last week, prompting a state of emergency and shut down all river activities. The governor toured the affected areas on Tuesday. The head of the U.S. EPA arrived on Wednesday, and the Attorney General of 3 states were present to ask questions. The EPA responsible for accidentally releasing the wastewater from the old mine originally said test results would not be available until mid-August. However, EPA Director Gina McCarthy said in her news conference Wednesday that early tests show the river has returned to its pre-spill condition. I think if you believe that, you're an idiot. There's so much lead and other stuff that was in there that's sitting on the bottom and just leaching. The Colorado State Health Department notified the city of Durango on Wednesday that the river was safe enough to begin using again and treating for drinking water. To make a point about its safety, the governor drank water straight from the Animas River, as captured by the Durango Herald. The newspaper said he wisely used a purification tablet to kill any bacteria. CBS Denver. Now, the problem is, I don't think one glass of purified water that still will have lead and mercury or whatever's in it, arsenic, that one glass is going to just all of a sudden kill you or put you in the hospital. But continual drinking long term could lead to a lot of issues. And you would probably see it in children being born, maybe not even right away. It might be something that starts showing up later down the road. For them to come out and say, we won't have test results until mid-August, and then say, but it's good enough to drink, I think is pretty premature, and it shows the ability for them to put people in harm just to make less of an issue out of their mistake, while your taxpayer money would be used to clean it up. will it actually be used to properly clean up? You know, it becomes one of those things. Well, do you want 2 million spent on it to have it cleaned up halfway where it's still a problem in certain areas, or would you might as well just pay the 3 million or so to have it done right, or 4 million? Long term, you know, they don't use money wisely. We see this with roads. Um, there's one city here in Indiana that they have a lot of bad roads, and they are spending large amounts of money taking intersections and four-way stops and turning them into roundabouts. And these roundabouts are, I'm telling you, they're dangerous. You kind of, people do not know how to work these roundabouts in a way that's fast and safe. It's one of those things where people just start going and crossing over, and you know, one bad thing too is these roundabouts are multi-lane roundabouts, so you have people trying to get over into the right one, that way they can kind of veer off onto this road, and other people trying to, it's a mess. I just don't even like going around any of that area in that city. But they're pitting them everywhere in the city, while other roads are literally just decaying. They have so many sections of the city that they will not put a dime into. But they are spending millions putting these roundabouts in. Well, it's just a perfect example of how government agencies, local or federal, handle money without care for what it's actually intended to be used for. When you pay taxes and you're expecting, okay, you know, I gotta pay tax, but they're going to be used for the roads. I'm voting for that. Oh, yeah. Well, when you say used for the roads, you mean these roads that are decaying that, you know, tear up your car going down. And when they mean, yeah, we'll use it for the roads in the wealthier and middle class, higher middle class areas and downtown, and where we choose that we like these things, and we're going to put roundabouts in. Wow, that road that, you know, you voted for that guy that said he was going to put it towards the roads, you're expecting your road to get fixed. No, that's not what happens. And, you know, if the EPA gets money for this, will they use it for what it's intended to be used for? Probably not. Okay, give me a second. Sorry, I'm having to restart my browser here. Trying not to open too much here. Just get everything back up. There we go. Okay, now I have a clip here. This one here is from Reason. And this is about Ross Albright. Okay. Now this is with Alex Winter, which she's the director of a new documentary, Deep Web. A question and answer about Ross Albright. Now, I don't know if many of you remember who Ross Albright is, but he's an alleged operator of the Silk Road. He is admitted to creating the Silk Road, but he claimed that he was not in possession of it during a certain period of time. But this is Ross Albright, attempted murderer, political revolutionary, or both. And the attempted murder, I think, has been debunked pretty severely. And you can look more into that if you want. But this is a question and answer with Alex Winter. And I want to play part of this and really kind of get into this whole thing about, your freedom and the government intrusion, because what Ross Albright, in a sense, did was create a place for the black market to operate in a way that reduced violence. Took a lot of the risk of that violence away. And I think it kind of, in a way, was an amazing thing as a creation. And, it goes back into government control again. But we'll get into this and then go from there. So give me a second here.
Never really wanted talked about Silk Road was whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not. That's the thing that the government has never really wanted talked about Silk Road. Not whether you agree with it or not. It was a political engine. Its motive was purely political. Hello. Thank you for coming out.
First of all, I thought it was a great film.
Oh, thank you.
One of the best documentaries I've ever seen, I think.
Oh, wow, jeez.
And
bottle that.
You tell a very complicated story. It's complicated in a number of ways, politically and otherwise. The technology explaining a lot of that. And you do it very clearly and accessibly, and I was fairly blown away.
Oh, thank you. I got here about 20 minutes ago. It's so depressing walking in at the end of this movie. Oy, what did we do?
So first of all, so how did you
How's that for an uplift?
How did you get to this project? I mean, clearly it takes a lot of passion to go through all that work.
I'll try to keep this short. I guess the short version is I got interested in the internet in the 80s, and this is the short version, I promise. Saddle up. And I was interested in the BBS newsgroup community, and what I found fascinating at that time was not so much computers and technology, but that there were these rapidly growing online communities that were really, because of the freedom and anonymity of the internet and the newness of it, there was this sort of democratizing component where people really felt free to talk about anything. And so there was some very radical discourse going on at that time on the internet. You did not need to be on like one of the hackers. There were a lot of hacker groups that were harder to get into. That's when I met Sean Fanning and Sean Parker later when I made the Napster movie. That's where those guys were. This is just straight up regular communities. Any idiot like myself could get into these. Anyway, they were very similar to what grew to become the darknet communities. And I've followed them through the years, and I've just been very interested in this, in the sort of more sociological aspect of the growth of online community. So I wanted to tell stories in that space. So I made the Napster movie. And then when I watched the Silk Road happen, 2012 is when I learned about it. And then when Ross was arrested in 2013, it was really clear that, to me, that Silk Road was the next big seismic shift in online communities. Napster was the first global internet community. That's really why it has significance. 100 million people online at once. It never happened before. Silk Road was the first time you had a full-scaling, efficient, anonymous online community. It was it's a watershed moment, and it's going to usher in a lot of change. So that's why I wanted to tell that story in a nutshell.
Toward the end of the film, Andy Greenberg, who's the Wired reporter, but I think he's also a producer on the film, is that right?
He was like a consulting producer. He wrote a really great book called This Machine Kills Secrets that I'd read, which is sort of touted as a WikiLeaks book. It isn't really. It's really a fantastic book about the evolution of cryptography and the cypherpunks. So I knew I wanted him involved really early on. We got him involved.
He says an interesting thing that also sort of confused me because he didn't quite spell it out. He said he's conflicted about the meaning of Silk Road and Ross Ulbricht, and he didn't quite explain his conflict. I mean, I took him to be basically a partisan throughout the film of Ulbricht and Silk Road and that general project. Then he says at the very end that he was actually conflicted about it. I'm wondering, I mean, do you know what he meant by that? And then I'm also wondering if you're conflicted about their meaning.
I think that what Andy is saying, and you know, there's a lot that flies by in this movie. It's evident by the bluntness with which he says he agrees with the government's position on the case. It's very interesting, given the journey that he's been on, that he comes to that conclusion. He believes the government has proven that Ross is guilty, and so to him, Ross's DPR, Ross did all these things, and yet he was also this idealistic. This is Andy's, opinion, that he's lived with this guy via DPR for so many years, for years, and in a very detailed micro fashion, and yet to have to reconcile the possibility that he had become potentially corrupted, that there were all these other nefarious things that had gone on, the breadth and scope of what had gone down on the Silk Road, left him in a really conflicted place psychologically, and which I find fascinating because, for me as a filmmaker, I was not actually conflicted because for me as an observer, having watched this whole thing happen, I didn't ever really get impacted by things that hadn't been proven in court. And I know a lot about hackers, and so I didn't totally swallow everything that had been presented. And because Ross was never formally charged with attempted murder, and that was never proven in court, it never occurred to me to assume that emotionally to get invested in the idea that he had done those things, because I needed to see them proven. And we never did get to see them proven. And so from an ethical standpoint, it never even occurred to me to try to put forward a position that Ross was guilty of something that he had never had the opportunity to defend himself against in court. It just never crossed my mind. So I find Andy interesting, and I love Andy to death, but it's not actually a position I agree with. And then on the other side, you have the parents who are vehement that Ross is 100% innocent. And the truth is probably somewhere between the two and in the middle and out in the ether. The point is, we don't know. We don't absolutely concretely know. The trial was abbreviated. I was there. It was very short. There was very little that got communicated. And there's a lot that I happen to know that we don't know that hasn't been made public.
I mean, for those of us who more or less think he's a hero of some sort, I mean, we need him to be guilty, right? Yeah, he's not a hero unless he actually is guilty of the major charge of running Silk Road.
Right.
That seems to be fairly clear. It seems like most people involved in the case agree with that.
Well, Ross admitted to
even
that.
he admitted to
Ross
it,
said Ross has admitted to creating Silk Road. Ross's position is, I created Silk Road. I am not Dread Pirate Roberts. I created it. I got it up and running. it was a team effort, a community effort, and I bailed out. And I had a hand in it, and that's his position. I don't know any more than that. Other than that, I do know from my inside perspective that there were several people that were running the Silk Road on the Judd Pirate Roberts account. I know 3 of them. But that doesn't mean necessarily, and there could be a reality in which he ran it and gave the administrative, password over to somebody because he couldn't be online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So I thought, but I guess I'm wrong, I thought that what Greenberg was referring to in terms of his own conflict was over just the freedom that Silk Road offered, right? That there will be wonderful things, wonderful benefits from it, but also potentially quite dark downsides to it.
No, Andy likes all that. I mean, Andy's very pro the freedoms that the internet offers, and he's very not to put words in his mouth, but just knowing him, he's he sort of bemoans, as I do, the ways in which the internet has gotten hobbled over the years. And like I said, like to me, to be on the BBS Newsgroup era was very romantic, and the darknet is also very romantic, and it's been demonized. And there are bad things that happen there, just like there are bad things that happen anywhere human beings congregate. But this notion of a privacy and anonymity-ridden, or driven community that is mostly journalists and human rights organizations and government agents that need to be able to protect themselves, and a lot of people speaking freely and wanting change, is a romantic ideal. It's a dangerous one, and it's one that a lot of people want to see snuffed out.
So I'm a U.S. historian, and I couldn't help.
Now, I kind of want to stop it there for a second. Now, when we talk about, the Silk Road, in the dark web, bad things happen there. Yeah, they do. Good things happen too. But yeah, bad things happen. But bad things happen on the regular internet, on Facebook, on Twitter. There's child predators out there. So when you look at it, does it offer any benefit? Well, yeah, it does. And it has. And any type of entrepreneurship that allows a free market to actually work and work in a safe way, they have to snuff that out. Back to this clip.
But be reminded of prohibition.
Right. Yeah.
And the uses of technology to basically subvert laws that we now all think should have been subverted, right?
Like the car.
Yeah, right. So the high-speed car that was used by bootleggers in the South, and the speedboats that were used to bring booze through the Caribbean, and so I'm thinking there's definitely a parallel there, or it's analogous in some ways. And then I'm thinking, but these guys, as far as we know, didn't kill anybody.
Right.
But they serve the same purpose, or are serving the same purpose. I think that what they will do to drugs is the same thing that the mafia did to alcohol in the 1920s, which is basically subvert these laws, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's happening is the drug war has given way to the Al Capones of today, which are not Ross. I mean, these gigantic cartels where, you're dealing with billions of dollars of drug trade and mass murder on a massive scale and political upheaval. Those are the Al Capones of Prohibition.
I was thinking through this today. I watched the film earlier this morning, and then I was thinking through it. And I guess the difference is that he didn't actually become a dealer himself, like the mafia did, right, in the 1920s. He essentially just created an alternate world in which this trade could go on unrestricted, right?
Yeah, I think that the categorical difference, there's two significant issues. One is the size. It was a big community. It's a tiny drug market. In the scheme of things, from a business standpoint and a law enforcement standpoint, it's a puny drug market. It's a speck in the water of the drug trade. That's not why the Silk Road was a threat to law enforcement. The drive in the media and from law enforcement to present the Silk Road as this horrific I mean, there were never hitmen on the Silk Road. There's never actually no hitmen on the darknet. If you see that in the media, by this point they actually know they're full of shit. There's no evidence of any hitmen. It's hyperbole. It's mostly trolls, like making fun of idiots who go online and look for people to kill people. But there's no evidence of anyone ever either advertising for legitimately or utilizing hitmen. So there's no real murder happening there. Most of the drugs that were sold on Silk Road was pot. There wasn't a ton of any drug. But what I encountered in researching the movie, which was a surprise to me, is that everybody that I met within the Silk Road was political. So the difference in terms of what you're saying, a long way around to answer your question, is Ross is political. You know, if you dig into, he's a very staunch libertarian, and everybody else that I interviewed, including the guy in red, who is one of the largest dealers on Silk Road and helped scale the user interface, and he's still at large, so he's an interesting person, but he's super political. Everybody there, they were there to use technology to dismantle the drug war and to create deregulated communities. So that's the thing that the government has never really wanted talked about Silk Road, was whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, it was a political engine. Its motive was purely political.
One of the charges against libertarianism and against, I suppose, internet users like this is that they are profoundly sort of antisocial, not just individualists, but they're antisocial.
Right.
And in a way, this film is an extended critique of that, right? That these people were actually primarily, you sort of end with that thing with Ross wishing for more connection with human beings. It's sort of, seems in some way the primary motivation for him was community. To establish an alternative community, but to be with people in a virtual way. Yeah, I mean the myth of the hoodie-wearing sociopathological hacker that we continually see in the media, I mean, is laughable. And I remember when I met Sean Fanning in 2000 when Napster was crumbling. And, these guys, these were the most social guys you'd ever met in your life. I mean, the myth about creating large technologies is that one person does it, It's a guy in a hoodie with a laptop, like Mr. Robot or the social network's portrayal of Zuckerberg, as opposed to how these systems are actually created, which is by community. You can't mount a large-scale technology like Silk Road, like Napster, like Amazon, without a massive community. And it's never one guy with a laptop. And usually, like Zuckerberg is super social and not at all like he was portrayed and has had the same girlfriend since he was fairly young. I mean, they're not sociopaths. They're kind of geek. They're smart, but they're kind of geeky guys. They have a lot of friends. It requires a lot of friends. It requires this huge network in order to build these. Same with Silk Road was a community-run operation. That did not surprise me as I scratched the surface. I found this core community of people that had put that thing together. But that's anathema to the way we want to present these narratives. The idea that these are community sort of oriented people is anathema to the prevailing narrative. One fact that is not in the film, which Kurt Loder told me about via Twitter today, and I think he told you too, was that I guess the judge in the case was recommended for nomination to the bench by Charles Schumer.
Yeah, I had to keep my mouth shut about that all year long. That was so tough. Yeah, I mean, the network is really, on a certain level, it's not surprising. Politics is politics. And, a lot of people, when Ross got arrested and he got extradited from San Francisco to New York, they were like, when they saw that he was being tried in the Southern District of New York, they were like, he's totally fucked. And this was like a year and a half ago. It's a very tight-knit community, and Schumer and the DA and the prosecutor and the judge, they're a tight-knit community, and the Southern District of New York tries a lot of financial regulation cases. There's a lot of people that believe this case is really a Bitcoin case, and it's really more about the threat to Wall Street markets than it is to anything else in terms of the level of commitment that they had in shutting this thing down and making an example out of Ross. There's been a lot of articles written about that. You can look them up. But it's a very tight-knit community, and Schumer made it very clear that he wanted, this to be dealt with in an extreme manner.
And I noticed I forget his name, but I think the other congressperson who led the fight against Silk Road is also a Democrat. Manchin?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, but it was the two of them, right? So it's sort of a...
Well, you're also dealing with old school issues, old school drug war issues. There's so many issues at play. It's really harrowing to watch a case like this happen. Like sitting in the courtroom, you realize that once the button gets switched and the machine just kind of cranks into gear, it's just unstoppable. And there was a kind of lumbering, almost thoughtlessness to it, to the way Ross is just kind of trampled into the dust. And it was really harrowing to watch. And the machine's set up. It's set up to dismantle drug war issues. It's set up to dismantle cyber. Ross had the misfortune of getting stuck in the crosshairs of those two over-prosecuted areas in our judicial system, which is cyber and the drug war. He's smack in the middle of both, which never bode well for him.
What's the reaction to the film been?
Well, it's been, varied. We've had overall a really, really great and positive reaction, which has been wonderful. I knew the film would be contentious. We didn't set out to make it provocative, but we did set out to tell the story the way we saw it. And we've been, I've been all over the world with the movie. We've been invited to festivals all over the world. I'm really happy with the reviews that we got. Even people that don't like it, it seems to have hit a nerve with them. And I don't really, I don't mean to sound flippant, but I don't care so much if someone likes a doc like this or not, as much as if they, if their brains get kind of kicked into gear by it on some level, even if they vehemently disagree with the way we're presenting it, that's okay. So it has had a ripple effect, which I'm really happy about. I got a letter from Ross from prison last week, where he said he's really, again, whether you like him or not, and I have to caveat, I don't really know Ross. Ross has been unattainable and inaccessible to me because of the severity of the crime. But he wrote me this very astute letter the other day where he just said, I'm not sure if this is going to have any impact on my appeal. Like, regardless of me, I'm getting all these letters in prison by people who didn't know anything about this world and about the drug war and about, the way cyber is being over-prosecuted and the way the darknet's being demonized. And he was just really happy to see that, I think it was satisfying to him to see that dialogue happening a little bit. And I was happy to see that. Again, we didn't set out to try to defend him, and I don't really know enough to do that one way or the other. I do hope he gets an appeal. I do hope that we get to see a substantive case trial anyway, which we haven't seen yet.
Great. Well, I'd love to take some questions, or we'd like to take some questions from the audience.
No, there's no way. You can't legally interview them.
Even after the fact?
No, the reason I didn't pursue any of this after the fact was twofold. One was creative. I actually wanted the movie to end with the sentencing in terms of just being information. I mean, this story is just what's happening with those two federal agents. There's so much more to the story. It's just beginning, right? But it's a movie. I wanted it to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I wanted that to be the end. So I didn't want to just keep interviewing people. Secondarily, to your point specifically, if you had been in the courtroom like I was and you had seen the jury, you would not be that interested in interviewing them. They were either asleep or, reading stuff or looking really confused. But it was, they didn't know what the hell, they had no idea what the hell was going on. I mean, they really didn't. So
Understood.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was at the sentencing, and the sentencing was interesting because, a lot of people don't like Ross. That's the thing about Ross. He's like a litmus test. He's either a libertarian hero or a crypto-anarchist revolutionary or an evil, drug-mongering, murderous thug. He's all these different things to all these people. So the sentencing, which had an overflow room, there were so many people there, was filled with people with varied ideas about Ross. They were not, it was not a cheering section by any stretch. But everybody was blown away by the sentence. Everybody. People were there were all these sort of judiciary students, all these legal students that were in them. They were just freaking out when the sentence was read. And what was really chilling about the sentence, and I think I said this to Kurt after the sentencing, was I actually, believe it or not, I never really fell that hard on one side or the other. I just wanted to know what happened. Was it possible that Ross did all those things, including trying to have people killed? I don't know. It's possible. No one's proven it. They didn't even charge him with it in the end, but it's possible. But the sentencing, I had a hard and fast opinion about. It was wrong, and it's excessive. And it doesn't fit the charges. So I think it's helped him towards an appeal. But, Forrest was really clear. It was a very long sentence. It went on for hours. We thought we'd be out of there in a half an hour. But she gave an almost hour-long speech about the merits of the drug war, why it needed to be upheld, and why Ross needed to be made an example of, and how he had disturbed the social fabric of our society, and how people who do use technology in this way are disrupting the social fabric of our society, and we must use Ross as an example. So she just bluntly said that she was making an example out of him, which was a fairly chilling thing to watch when the person's that young and they're going to be in a max. There's not that many max security prisons in America, so he's going to a fairly grim place for 60 years, 50 years?
Progressives led the movement for prohibition too.
Yeah, that's right. Because there was an argument early on. This is a question of transferred intent is the issue of actually FedEx was charged or was attempted to be charged with this last year too, where they were I think it was California. Am I right about that? That was claiming that FedEx should be held responsible for the drugs that were being moved and other contraband that was being moved through FedEx, even though FedEx was not aware of them, and if they were, which is what the court was suggesting, is that they actually were aware of them, that they were not responsible. So there's been questions around whether Ross could be held responsible for the negative or criminal aspects of his site. The judge argued early on that transferred intent was not applicable because the Silk Road was clearly, and even within its manifesto, created with a specific intent to traffic contraband. That's debatable. I think, honestly, I actually had this debate with someone in a Q&A recently who got very angry with me because I wouldn't fall hard on the side of Ross falling into the transferred intent debate, because the Silk Road, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't create a revolutionary technology and then say, hey, you can do whatever you want with it. It was created as a revolutionary technology. So if you do that, you can't be surprised if someone says, I'm going to slap your wrist for creating a revolutionary technology. It's happened in Napster on a much smaller scale. But honestly, I think the two cases are extremely similar. More quickly, I found them through a bunch of different means. I have encryption, and I was sending out sort of encrypted messages through various places that I knew they'd be read, and a lot of people got in touch with me. I did a Kickstarter. A lot of people got in touch with me through PGP encryption because of the Kickstarter. People knew me because it downloaded, and they knew that I cared about these issues. They got in touch with me for that reason. Some people actually even knew back from the BBS era that were either political or moving drugs online back then, which was my first interaction with both drugs online and encrypted email. It was back in 1990. Some of those people were the same people who were architecting the Silk Road, which is not surprising considering how well it run. It wasn't just created by a 26-year-old kid who had no technical skills. He had a team of people there were a team of people behind it that had a history online. So that was that. And it sort of bleeds into your second question because, again, like I said, and it was a surprise to me. I thought I was going to find more just people who were dealing drugs on the Silk Road because they like drugs. And I kept looking for those people, and I couldn't find them. Everyone I met was political. And, this guy, the guy in red, who's one of the largest heroin dealers on Silk Road, but also was one of the chief technical architects of Silk Road, was, political, and I can't say more than that, but very political and had a history in politics and cyber and all of that. And so they wanted to talk because they did Silk Road. And if you were on the Silk Road forums, I don't know if any of you were back when Silk Road was running, it was almost all political discourse on Silk Road, or it was talking about drug safety and drugs from a community standpoint. And what's interesting about this movie when it does piss people off is that it's an unpalatable thing to discuss, right? Like, what if you are a drug dealer and like this guy, you actually are a heroin user, which he is, and you're trying to help your customers not overdose? That's just an extremely unpalatable thing to talk about. And people will watch and be like, oh, fuck that, he's full of shit. It's like, I know him really well. You may not like him, but he's not full of shit. Like, he's done a lot of stuff to try to help, and there were other doctors on the Silk Road who were trying to help people. It's not to say it's a great thing. It's simply to say that someone like Neil Franklin, who's the executive director of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, who speaks so eloquently in the film, these people really believe that drug markets online are the future for everyone's benefit, right? The users and to dismantle the drug war. Then you go to people like Chris Segoin from the ACLU or Cindy Cohn from EFF, who feel like the darknet gets demonized and it shouldn't be demonized and there's a lot of good that's going on. But then you say, okay, well then does that mean Silk Road is a good thing? And most of the people I just mentioned will run for the hills, right? But that's different. That's like drug dealers and it's crime and it's like all this horrible shit. I'm like, you can't have one without the other. You can't. There has to be. It's got to start somewhere, and it's usually very radical, criminal, or sort of beyond the law type people that aren't easy to put in one box or another that start these types of services that will evolve into services that we all embrace. And I watched that happen with Napster, with all these people that thought Napster was horrible, it was evil, these guys were evil. And then Steve Jobs picked Napster up out of the ashes, hired everybody, brought them into the iTunes store, made a swindling deal with the record industry, and suddenly he's okay. And what he did is, that's cool. And they're building a giant-ass building up north, with all the proceeds from that. Well, you wouldn't have had that without Sean Fanning, who everyone views as a criminal. It's impossible. But it's unpalatable to society. We don't like that. We like to wait out these guys that rush through the door that we think are unpalatable until somebody a bit more palatable shows up and picks up the ashes of these technologies and makes them palatable. And that's part of why I wanted to tell this story the way that I did, which is, you may not like them, but they are necessary. That's a really great question. And I think we addressed it pretty well in the movie, because for me, the person who actually says the thing that I think nails this thing is Cody. Because Cody says, look, the libertarians can't handle the fact that what if DPR, and he doesn't go far as to call it Ross, he doesn't know whether Ross is DPR. What if DPR did try to kill those people? Right? And nobody was killed. So there were no bodies, there were no deaths, there were no murders. But there does seem to be somebody, whether it was corrupt law enforcement agents or DP or Ross, we don't know. There's such a tangled mess behind the veil of Silk Road, that was engaged in a murder corruption plot. Cody says, okay, let's assume that was DPR. Well, I still say he's a hero. In fact, I say he's more of a hero because he did that. That's what I would like to think I would do if I was in his position. Because to me, DPR is a revolutionary. He's not just some libertarian who wants to create a unregulated marketplace and screw the government. No, this guy's actually revolutionary. He wants to topple shit, and he's willing to go the distance to do it. And I think that that's an important notion to contemplate. Again, it isn't to say that's good or that's bad. Cody's aware of the provocative nature of that statement. Cody is largely about provocation, but it's not empty provocation. He likes to get people to think. Is how far are you willing to go to have the society that you want? And how far does one have to go in order to achieve that aim? And it isn't to say, most people get very black and white. They get very dialectical, like, well, are you saying that's good? Well, that's a terrible thing. It's like, no, it's not about good or bad. It's just a fact of, if you're going to do something revolutionary, you're going to have to face some really difficult choices. What are you going to do when you face those choices? And what does that mean about your legacy?
I've also seen some libertarians argue that it was an act of self-defense, or would have been an act of self-defense, that an informant working for the state who's going to put you in prison has actually initiated aggression, right? I thought it was a fairly persuasive argument, actually.
Yeah. And I'm going to stop it right there. Now, when it says going, how far are you willing to go to get towards this society? And, this goes, even back to things like the Oath Keepers that are willing to go out there and be, in these positions. Now you have people like libertarian, finger quotes going on, Glenn Beck, that will go, well, it's not time. Like he's the guardian of the time that revolutionary acts take place. People like a lot of the Oath Keepers, they are doing those revolutionary acts. They're willing to put their fortune, meaning their wealth, their home, their livelihood, their bodies on the line for what's right. And when they do that, that sends a message because, some of these people are former law enforcement, former military. These people can relate to the other people over there. And they go, no, you don't fire on peaceful protesters. And people go, well, that one kid started popping off that pistol. But what you don't see before that is these large groups of cops coming in riot gear with rubber bullets and shooting a whole bunch of protesters, running in with their riot gear and arresting people and beating them. Whether you agree with the protest or not, if they're out there protesting, if you want your right to protest when something is being done upon you in your community, then they have the right to peacefully protest. And then when you do have the provocateurs in the peaceful protests, those same people put their lives on the line to protect businesses and journalists and, protesters. When you see people willing to do that, that is a revolutionary act. And we have a lot of libertarians doing it. People looked at what Adam Kokesh did. Idiot. That's a revolutionary act, saying that I'm going to do this, even though they told me I can't, because this is my right. Even though he went through what he went, he took a plea deal, whatever, he did it. And he's still, sending the message of, what freedom and liberty really is. Whether you agree with everything he has to say, I don't agree with anybody on everything. But we have revolutionary people out there, and we have a lot of people that will down talk them and talk crap about them. Well, you go out there and be revolutionary. Because sometimes we might judge people that will go to a extreme to send a message. Well, what Clive and Bundy and those Oath Keepers and the other militiamen and the other families and ranchers, what they did was revolutionary. And when the government decides to come after you, whether we're on the same, spectrum on how someone should live their life, I hope there's going to be people that will still stand up for your right. And that's what libertarians really need to start doing. We have a lot of so-called libertarians that really still have not got the full meaning of what libertarianism is, or just the philosophy of freedom. Despite just maybe a libertarian, but the philosophy of freedom, and understand natural rights. Not the Bill of Rights, natural rights. Bill of Rights are a pretty good jest of a lot of natural rights. It might not have everything in there. Just like any animal, when they give birth, they have a right to parent that and raise that baby until it's ready to go off on its own. we don't understand natural right. Well, if we think beyond animals, then we can get beyond that. And the child could be a part of the community instead of the parent. The community will raise that child. Well, we know what that type of society tends to lead to. A group of people that just continually end up being the gears of society rather than the creators of society. When you have the freedom to be who you want to be, to pursue the lifestyle you choose, and to freely interact, voluntarily interact, and people will just stand up for others in their natural rights, society could achieve a lot of great things. But right now they got us interfighting. They'll keep dividing us, and they'll conquer us if we don't wake up to this. But I think with the Oath Keepers being out there in Ferguson again, the continual spread of that type of a message and trying to wake people up to, don't let them divide and conquer us. We need to really get down to, you have rights. We all have rights. Let's start using them. And in today's society, using your rights is a revolutionary act. And that says something about our society. Okay. Now, I'm going to play this clip if it'll load. Try to close it and reload it here. Okay, let me see if it's going to work. Maybe not. Things aren't cooperating with me over here. Excuse me. I can try to load it up this way too, so give me a second here. Okay. Kind of get into some talking about election now. Reality check with Ben Swan. Can GOP actually ban Donald Trump from future debates? And there's a lot of Ron Paul supporters going, oh yeah.
Donald Trump makes new headlines every day, but something he said that he wouldn't do during the first Republican debate could reveal some major problems with the debate system. Could the GOP actually ban the Donald from its next debate? This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else. Well, the first Republican debate 1 week ago opened with a question specifically for Donald Trump,
who is unwilling tonight to pledge your support to the eventual nominee of the Republican Party and pledge to not run an independent campaign against that person. Again, we're looking for you to raise your hand now. Raise your hand now if you won't make that pledge tonight. Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump.
Yeah, of the 10 candidates on the stage, Trump was the only candidate who said that if he does not get the GOP nomination, he might run as an independent. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's also a very expensive thing to do. And Donald Trump is probably the only candidate running who could actually afford to launch an independent campaign. Because Trump said that he would not rule out running as an independent, the RNC has now said it could ban him from the next debate if he won't make that pledge. According to ABC News, Republican National Committee Chairman Reince Priebus has directly called on all candidates not to make a third-party run. The Republican Party, they have some leverage here. Senior GOP officials have said that it's possible that future debates could be limited to candidates who have pledged support for the party, a move that could leave Trump out of debates if he's still leaving open the possibility of running as an independent. The RNC has already made it clear that it would withhold valuable party data on Republican voters from any candidate unwilling to pledge support to the party. So the real question, if Donald Trump is polling at twice the numbers of his closest challengers and as much as 5 times the numbers of 7 of the top 10 candidates, and he is, then how could the Republican Party ban him from debating? Can they even do that? The answer is yes. You see, the Republican Party, just as with any Democratic Party, is considered a private club. They make their own rules. The Democratic Party isn't holding a single debate until October, something the candidates like Martin O'Malley aren't happy about, but there's nothing they can really do. And that is why a senior Trump official has told ABC News that it is possible that Trump may make that pledge. Though Trump has clarified that statement, saying it's absolutely possible that at some point I would change that, but he added such a change is not imminent.
If I'm the nominee, I will pledge I will not run as an independent.
Well, what you need to know is that the Republican Party claims it has every right to prevent Trump or anyone else from debating because it is a private club. But reality check, in actuality, they're really not. In fact, American taxpayers, get this, spent $400 million administering Republican and Democratic primaries in 2012. And that is one of the major problems with the way these parties conduct business, because on average, only about 9% of the voting population actually vote in national primaries. Still, 100% of taxpayers are on the hook for these so-called private events. That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that tonight on Twitter.
So, we already know that they can ban whoever they want. Most of us know that they are considered a private club, even though they get a lot of taxpayer money. Not really surprising. It's not something kind of alien to people. But a lot of people just see it as something kind of amazing because he is polling so high. But they could let him into the debates and not give him all kinds of information. And people are like, well, why would they do that? Not show him where he's at or give him more information. Well, if he runs as third party, they don't want him to know all that information. But more than likely, if he continues to try to run as a Republican for the primary, he'll probably make that pledge. I see him doing it. It's a business decision. It's Trump. I've already went over him quite a bit. Give me a second. I have a few here that I have to choose from. I can't cover them all. And this is about Rand Paul. This one was out of Rolling Stone. Rand Paul is losing his own flame war. It's a bad sign when your campaign is starting to resemble a comment section flame war, especially when you're doing it wrong. And Rand Paul, the sort of young, sort of hip, sort of libertarian presidential candidate with a campaign that likes to think it's sort of good at the internet, is doing it wrong. Paul isn't just screwing up, he's screwing up comprehensively. His attacks on Donald Trump this last week have been an effort shit show. He's drawing negative attention back on his own campaign, and he's undermining his default brand, that of the semi-cool academic type who can't be bothered with how wrong everyone is. He's coming off as thirstiest dude in the field of candidates whose thirst baseline already looks like a bunch of guys who got stranded in the desert after going to town on a salt lick. I really get a sense of Paul's faltering. Let's go to the tapes. Forget the one where Paul conveys the sobriety of his campaign by sawing apart the tax code with less serious than a Frank Black video. There's another one released Wednesday titled Rand Paul Telling It Like It Is. It features ominous and old footage of Donald Trump saying the economy performs better under Democrats, and that's he's met Hillary Clinton and thinks she's a nice person. The Paul campaign followed the video up with a statement. Rand is running to fight the big business, big government establishment. Donald Trump already represents one end of the problem. Now he wants to represent the other. Paul's ads and response is basically an unforced error layer cake. One, as Mother Jones David Corn points out, one of Paul's stump reframes during both of his father's 2008 presidential campaign and his own 2010 Senate campaign involved praising Jimmy Carter as a far better president than Ronald Reagan when it came to the budget. Now, leave aside that what Trump said about the economy's performance under the Democrats was true, irrespective of whether his conclusion can actually be attributed to Democrats. If what Trump said counts as conservative apostasy, then Rand's own stump speech about Reagan being worse than Carter is akin to climb up on a crucifix and nailing a clown mask on Republican Jesus D. Number two, whatever else you think of the Trump campaign, Trump pointing out that he can buy politicians but can't be bought himself is not only hilarious but mostly true, and it exposes a deep fissure in the conservative worldview. Rand's response to Donald's donating largesse for candidates of both sides of the aisle involves drawing attention to a problem he cannot possibly ideologically object to, When Trump donates to both parties, he's investing in future influence peddling to reduce red tape on projects he undertakes. And I'm not going to read the rest of this, but, you know, Rand Paul really needs to really go back. The internet's really an amazing tool if Rand Paul really learns it really, really well, where he can just go hit up a computer and find out what empowered the people behind your father. I think what you're going to find out, Rand, is one, you haven't been in this long enough. Two, you haven't been consistent enough. Three, you really need to hit the hard libertarian issues and hit it with a hard libertarian message. And even though maybe Ron Paul wasn't always the greatest speaker, his message was based so hardly on factual information, and he had the backing of his political career to show he meant what he said. These were beliefs that he believed, wholeheartedly in. And I really think Rand Paul really needs to spend some more time really deep in these ideologies and really concept of freedom and understand what empowered those people behind Ron Paul. Honestly, I've seen people that were back in 2008, along with myself, but people back in 2008, even in 2012, that really heard Ron Paul talk about so many issues and kept watching and watching more and going, this guy really just changed me. And within a couple years, they just got so into reading and looking into the philosophy that they had a extremely good understanding. And Rand Paul's grown up around a lot of this. And I think he needs to, through all these errors, he has the ability to learn something from it. And I think he possibly will. Okay, give me a second here. Okay, give me a second here. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think I'm going to have enough time if I do get it to work. Okay, it popped up. I have one here. Hacking everything in Las Vegas. We are change. I wanted to play this real quick. It's a pretty quick clip, so here we go.
We had a late morning, but we're getting started here at DEF CON, and this place is fascinating. Well, this is Vegas, so you expect to see stuff like this. Guys just collecting coins for the slot machines. So this is a kettle that you could actually turn on through your Wi-Fi, but someone driving by your house with a reader could get your Wi-Fi password through this unsecured kettle. Which again shows you how stupid and unsecure a lot of these companies are that are putting Wi-Fi devices on virtually everything. Your Wi-Fi password is unsecure when you connect this to it. Vulnerability is that. This was probably so easy to read. Yeah. So these items have not been hacked yet, and these items have been. So this is all critical infrastructure for any major city that these guys are trying to hack through the hardware and make sure it's safe for your city. For example, this is a water distribution system, and at any of these points, it's a point of failure. If you see the lights, that means people are getting into the system. If they get all three lights, they get all the way in and have full control of just one of these points of entry into getting water into your town. They could stop the pump, they could stop the flocation controls, which makes the sediment go down, they could stop the filters, they could stop the disinfectant and the distribution centers at any time. And now we're learning about Stuxnet, how to shut down a nuclear enrichment program. This happened to Iran. This is the social engineering portion of the talks. A lot of interesting things happen here. People sit down, call people, and engineer them socially to get whatever they want. Moments ago, someone sat there, pretended to be an IT professional, and called a major cable company and was able to find out all the vulnerabilities in their system by just pretending. Of course, we can't film this, and we can't disclose which major cable company just pretty much gave out all their flaws in their system to a random hacker here. But social engineering is definitely fascinating and definitely something that I've been using in my forte to actually get into a lot of the events that I've been able to cover throughout my whole career. Here, people are learning how to get through tamper-proof evidence tape by injecting it. Sorry, not filming it. Now they're doing drone hacking with an AR pirate drone. We're going to fly it in the air, and someone's going to take it over virtually and control it through a second party, an unauthorized. All you have to do to take control of an AR drone is to connect to its Wi-Fi, and then simply put in a command like kill one or other commands, and then you totally take this thing down or do other things to it. Of course, without the original user's consent. Anyone could do it if you're flying one of these things. Here, people are learning how to open envelopes with humidifiers, and then you get this personal message, and they teach you how to do this here. This is awesome. So we all have records as passes into this thing, and they're actually playable. If you get all the passes and you figure out the message and you decode it, you win the special contest.
A service already existing without paying for what could be dirt cheap if it wasn't run by profiteering gluttons. And you call us.
So we just met Sammy Kamkar, an amazing hacker. We literally just came back from the roof where he showed me how he could open any car with his hacking device. A universal device that anyone could make right now that he's trying to get out there and spread public information that he just released right now so hackers can't get into your car. Black Hat, they give you a bunch of free stuff, but at DEF CON, you could buy a bunch of way cooler stuff. One thing I love about hackers, they're outside the box thinkers, and overall just awesome partiers as well. Behind me actually is the wall of sheep, all of the logins and passwords for people who weren't secure. Luckily, I haven't found myself on there yet. I definitely don't plan to, but one thing you learned here at these hacker conferences is that everything is hackable at any moment, at any time. Being picked up by another stranger here. So you know the drill. If you don't see any more snaps, something bad happened to me. I like adventures. The Heart Attack Grill, of course, I made it safe, and I love this place. Look at the toilets. You get to piss on Bush and Obama. I love this place. Sorry. This place is wild. You get butt spankings. If you don't finish your meal, you get a butt spanking. And then the vegan menu is just cigarettes. I'm in love with this place. It's cash only.
Okay, I think he's done talking about the hacking things, but there's so much out there, so much information, and the problem has been a lot of this information hasn't been able to get into your hands. And a lot of this information has been in the hands of law enforcement, government agencies, and you've been vulnerable to the government for a lot longer than what we think. We just haven't had a government that was so blatantly intrusive and kind of going to that, we're going to do this, we're going to do it in front of your faces, we don't care what you think, and you're going to go along because we have a police state. This information, a lot of people, oh, it's about hacking. You don't want to get involved in that. No, understanding your vulnerabilities and things allows you to come up with more creative ideas to protect yourself, protect your property, protect your privacy. These are things that people need to be more involved in. And, you know, hopefully these conferences really spread and get out there more, because it's really important understanding this information and taking measures to protect yourself. Okay. Just happened. I have one last one I want to cover here. And I have it here from two places, freethoughtproject.com and infowars.com. This one here, right here, the freethoughtproject.com. Breaking Sheriff compares constitutionalists to ISIS. Spokane County Sheriff Ozzie Nezovich linked rhetoric from supporters of the U.S. Constitution to violent anti-government groups and ISIS this week in an expose on the officers' fight against homegrown extremists. In an article featured in the August 2015 edition of Inlander, the Washington State Sheriff draws comparison to the ISIS terrorist group while railing against everyone from InfoWars, Alex Jones, to Washington State Representative Matthew Shea. There are some of those folks that want to overthrow the government, period. They want to hit a reset button. Nezovich said if they're willing to lie to get that reset button, this is how ISIS starts. The Inlander piece highlights the sheriff's ongoing campaign against local conservative groups who he feels are pushing dangerous rhetoric. When asked to specifically name those responsible, Nezovich pointed to both Representative Shea and all those folk that created the video about the deputy. Nezovich's statement refers to exclusive footage released by InfoWars last December, which highlighted unsettling comments made by a Spokane sheriff's deputy as he stood next to the department's mine-resistant ambush protective military vehicle, MRAP, after a local resident approached and questioned law enforcement's need for military hardware. The deputies used constitutionalists with firearms as justification. I mean, we've got a lot of constitutionalists and a lot of people that stockpile weapons, a lot of ammunition. The deputies said they have weapons here locally. They have the video here posted. The video brought about an immediate backlash after receiving nationwide attention, causing Nezovich to accuse InfoWars of hate-mongering and taking the deputy's comments out of context instead of apologizing for the comments made by his deputy. Sheriff Nezovich essentially blamed InfoWars for daring to report on the issue, claiming that the quote was taken out of context while failing to explain how such a brazen statement could be taken for anything other than its face value, noted InfoWars Paul Joseph Watson at the time. Speaking with InfoWars, Representative Shea expressed outrage at Nezovich's latest comments and also the article's analysis on a local pastor. I fought Islamic terrorists on the ground in Iraq face to face, Shea said. I lost a man who was a Christian and who would have fit the sheriff's definition of a constitutionalist under my command fighting Islamic terrorists. It's outrageous to compare constitutionalists to Christians and Christians to ISIS. We believe in freedom. We believe in liberty, a value set that is rooted in the Judeo-Christian tradition. ISIS is anathema to those things. I call on every Christian and constitutionalist in the country to demand an apology from the sheriff for his outrageous comments and demand his immediate resignation. Nezovich also went on as far as blaming InfoWars Alex Jones for a group of men who were arrested earlier this month for an alleged murderous Jade Helm 15 retaliation plot. This right here is all because of a bunch of words from Alex Jones. Nezovich said Alex Jones started the Jade Helm fire. Words become reality. The sheriff pointed to the Bunny Ranch as well, accusing supporters of looking for a trigger to take on the government. There are people out there looking for that trigger, he said. They are praying that trigger would be at Bundy Ranch. A vocal supporter of the Southern Poverty Law Center organization that similarly and falsely links law-abiding Americans to domestic extremism. Nezovich states that such groups are breeding a generation of Americans who distrust their government. Quote, you will not have a next generation to defend this country, the sheriff said. You will have all taught them to hate and distrust this nation. Now, that's the end of the article from Free Thought Project. Now, are we teaching children to distrust the government, or is the government making themselves distrustful? That is the issue. If you can't look upon yourself and your errors and your ideology and your philosophy on what you believe freedom to be, you become part of the problem. And, people go, don't spread fear. You got to tell the truth. If the truth causes fear in people or causes hatred in people, then shouldn't we be examining that instead of examining the people? Definitely when it becomes things like, should you have the right to self-defense? Should you have a right to your own property, your choice to put into your body what you choose, the choice to raise your children the way you choose, the choice to live off the grid, the choice to live, where you choose, the choice to hunt for your food. All these things are not debated within these type of organizations. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a great weekend and stay tuned here on UCY.tv. Take care.